Welcome back to the SampanViking on China channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the disturbing events which seem to be following the Ukraine crisis, inverted commas, the ongoing saga of the supposed potential invasion of Ukraine by Russia, as put out by the Western powers. It is, I think, worth of reminding that the only people talking about a potential invasion is the West itself, primarily the US and the UK. Russia, on every occasion, has denied it has any intention of invading the Ukraine. This is a message put out to its domestic audience as well as to the foreign audience, which means that there is no shaping of public opinion, no preparation of public opinion at home in Russia for an invasion, which would be an essential part of any invasion plan. And you only need to look at the amount of the media campaign which went ahead of the 2003 US-UK invasion of Iraq to understand what this sort of campaign would be like, the amount of media presence, the profile of it, the type of content, etc., etc. There is no ongoing demotification of the Ukraine state, the Ukrainian people, warnings of imminent threats from Ukraine, which have to be resolved. What we do have, of course, is warnings that there are red lines, which includes the Ukraine, that would trigger Russian action. That is not the same as a preemptive invasion, which is the narrative which we're getting from the UK, US. And we have come to a stage now where I think there is enough and worrying warnings coming from both those sources to be concerned that a provocation is being planned by the West in order to accuse Russia of invasion, even if it doesn't actually trigger an actual invasion itself. Going back about a week ago, we had a story in the media about being careful about a Russian-sponsored false flag. Well, by saying that, they actually opened the doors to a US-sponsored false flag, which they then blame directly on the Russians. We have had weird stories in the last few days about Russia choosing Ukrainian politicians to be heads and senior members of a new puppet regime in Kiev that the Russians are going to install, despite the fact that all the people mentioned are either not in the Ukraine, former Ukrainian politicians now in exile and definitely out of power in Russia, or active, or the main person they mentioned actually was under sanctions by Russia and had money confiscated and everything, despite the fact that he came from what is regarded as one of the pro-Russian areas of Ukraine ruled eastern Ukraine, the Kharkov region. So again, a fairly strange story. But now we have both, in concert, the United States and UK embassies withdrawing families of embassy staff and non-essential embassy staff. Um, it's the kind of thing, it's easy, and many people I've been speaking to today, and I've been speaking to quite a few, can put it down to a media stunt, but it's the kind of thing where they would look pretty foolish if after doing this nothing were to happen. And seeing as I think Mr. Putin is very unlikely to just willingly oblige by doing something that the United States and UK governments would like him to do in the furtherance of their aims, that they'd probably take the initiative and do it themselves and simply claim that Russia had done it. And indeed, as we go back to the 2014 war, routinely it was claimed that Russian forces were in the Donbass and fighting the Ukrainian army. I think certainly they did intervene on a couple of occasions in very specific instances, and we know that because the Ukrainian army went sharply into retreat, either stopped dead in its tracks or was sent sharply back in retreat. And as other commentators have said, most of this intervention seems to have taken the form of long-range artillery, which was delivered with devastating pinpoint accuracy, and which forced the Ukrainians to retreat. I know there's been accounts in those days also of Russian armor columns coming through, hitting and sending back. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It was in the interest of Ukrainians and their backers to claim that. I think the stories about the artillery have that ring of truth about them, which is rather conclusive as far as I'm concerned. We are probably heading back into such areas at the moment. This is the week where Blinken has promised Lavrov a response to the Russian proposals. And whilst we would hope it was it could be a written proposal, which is so unacceptable to the Russians, it is effectively a breach of the red line to which they are already committed to reacting, and so they have no further reasons to hold off. That they would conclude that red line has technically already been breached, and therefore they have no other option really but to respond, or it's a non-verbal response in the form of a provocation, probably in the Donbass of some sort, which which, irrespective of what the course of events is, it results in an attack on the Donbass regions by the Ukrainian army and necessitates the intervention of the Russian forces, as this again is another red line that has been drawn by Russia in regards to the Ukraine. But at all points, this narrative is one which is UK-US driven, and any events that start the fighting in the Ukraine would undoubtedly be US-UK driven, and Russia very much a reactive power, simply responding how it has to a situation that unfolds. Which begs the question, why? Why would the West do this? In the same way people ask, well, if Putin were to go into the Ukraine, what would be the benefit to him? If the US-UK were to force an action in the Ukraine by the Russians, what would be the benefit to them? And the obvious answer is that, well, not very much. This is a fight that the Ukrainians would clearly lose. Brave talk about partisan fighting and raising the cost. I've heard commentators on both sides, and I think a lot of very sensible comments have been made about really certainly if if the Russians stuck to the Novorossiya regions, the very pro-Russian former Russian territories, Russian speaking, um, there wouldn't be that much dissent within those countries, certainly at the moment, because the economy of Russia is so much stronger than the economy of the Ukraine. Most of them, I'm glad, would be happy to be taken out of it and restored to something much bigger and much economically stronger with far more opportunities. People forget that. The only thing really that I can think of why the Americans would want to do this is simply because the Ukraine is a headache for them. The Maidan project failed, really, because whilst they managed to get rid of Yanukovych, who described as a pro-Russian leader, that's very misleading. He wasn't pro-Russian, and he simply wasn't rabidly anti-Russian. He was happy to be situated in the middle between both, East and West, and play both off and get the benefits from both. That still wasn't enough for the US, and he was ousted, and a rabidly anti-Russian leader in the shape of Poroshenko originally. Well, no, it wasn't the original one; he was the second one. But a succession of rabidly and anti-Russian leaders installed to lead campaigns against Russia and the Russian-speaking minority in the Ukraine itself. So the the project itself was, as indeed was Georgia, was all about getting Russia out of the Black Sea region. Let's spit that out and make that clear. It was about depriving Russia of the Crimea and the naval bases there. Similar in Georgia, there's fairly major deep water ports in Abkhazia that Russia uses. Had they lost those ports, the ability to have, plus further fragmentation of the southern Caucasus, would have effectively driven the Russians away from the Black Sea, turning it into a NATO lake, and from that also opening a clear channel across from the Black Sea, across the Caucasus, across the Caspian, into Central Asia, and another, along with the Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, corridor, another way into Central Asia for the destabilization, for the natification of Central Asia, effectively, and then the breakup of Russia and the total surrounding and eventual breakup of China, which was the original plan, as I've discussed on many times before. So they made a play on the Ukraine. It didn't work, and Russia got the Crimea. The West got the rest of the Ukraine, which is an impoverished, corrupt, potentially quite rich country, but so badly managed as to be a massive headache. The EU don't want it because they know they'd be swamped by millions of unemployed and broke. It would be a further wave of migrant workers, causing all sorts of problems in the economies of Western Europe, and trying to maintain and support the stance of the last 8 years, expensive, counterproductive, and pretty much a waste of time. Far better to provoke the Russians into taking an action that the United States can, and it looks though they'd be doing this unilaterally now, because very few other allies seem to have any interest in going ahead with most of the key sanctions. The Germans don't want to lose Nord Stream. The sanctions on SWIFT is a non-starter because the Germans and the other Europeans want to pay the Russians for the gas. So simply, it seems to be the United States forbidding major Russian banks from using the dollar in transactions, which would have some effect, I'm sure. So what we have effectively is the US, I think, trying to offload a headache, an unwanted headache, a territory that is of very little use to it whatsoever. They know that they can't turn it into a NATO territory. Russia will intervene. To maintain the status quo is just a drain on their resources for actually no good return whatsoever. And the sanctions, in this sense, that the US would impose can be looked on as a 21st version of a scorched earth policy, aimed at the economy rather than as the actual physical ground. It's a way of slowing things up for the Russians so that they'd have to spend time, energy, etc., etc., putting good the damage that has been bequeathed to them as their enemy falls back. Dangerous times, though. It is difficult to say for sure exactly what's going to happen. It is hard to look at the kinds of stories that are coming out and simply write them off as media stunts. These have a familiar pattern to them. There is the same drumbeat behind that we become used to hearing when a colour revolution project is unleashed. This is slightly different. This, again, though, is a coordinated project, and I think this is ultimately the US just trying to get its backside out of a bad situation in the Ukraine. The main objectives failed. Time to get out. They can't just walk out like they did in Afghanistan, which is another concern. That if they left, go in similar circumstances, it's going to look bad all over again. In this case, although they are technically committed and in a no-win situation, effectively, and so the chance to get out and let the other side take the blame for all the problems, and what I suspect is all of this boils down to. Well, thank you very much for listening. I hope you found what I had to say of interest. If you did and liked, please do hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber to this channel, please do subscribe. It's free and it does help the channel to grow. If you would like to add your opinion on the situation in Ukraine or on this channel in general, please leave a message and I will be pleased to respond as best as I can, as quickly as possible. Thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to you joining me on the next video. Thank you.